Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large. And as you can see, if you're following on YouTube with video rather than on Google Play, iTunes, or Stitcher, where I also post as an audio podcast, you can see that this week I am joined by two amazing, wonderful friends and guests. Jonathan Streeter, who is an ex-Mormon, and Lloyd Evans, who is an ex-Jehovah's Witness, both of whom have been on my channel before on podcasts and videos. We have decided to collaborate as the three Apostates. And welcome, guys.
Great to be here, Chris.
Thanks for having me here, Chris. And and not being put off by all of my harassment and stalking of you over the months. You're a very forgiving man, I'll say that.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it hasn't been too bad.
And we did settle on the three Apostates, right? It wasn't going to be like the three horsemen of the apocalypse or some of the other suggestions that people had.
Well, I thought we'd go with that.
I was gunning for the three amigos because I really wanted to wear a sombrero, but you know, what are you going to do?
Right, exactly. Well, anyway, yeah, I thought that this might be, and I think we all thought that this might be a good plan to do these from time to time, and sort of compare and contrast, you know, differences and similarities between what all three of us have experienced in our various cult histories, and or you know, group histories or whatever you want to call it. The terminology at this point, it's funny as time, and this is the first question I wanted to ask you guys is, as time has gone on here. You know, we've all advocated against the groups that we had been part of in the past, right? Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Scientology for me, because we came out of those groups finding that, you know, we had been deceived, we had been, you know, brought up or given principles that we found were not really so constructive as they had been presented to be. And, but I'm finding that some of the terminology that I came onto or grasped or something as I came out of my cult experience is becoming less important. You know, all the words and stuff that we use to describe the methods and techniques and all that stuff. I mean, they're important in terms of defining coercive behavior, but I'm finding, you know, whether I'm going to call it a destructive group, high control group, destructive cult, whatever, I don't know. It's not such a big deal to me anymore. What do you guys think about that?
I don't know. Maybe we've started our collaboration immediately on a point of controversy because I don't know, which is, hey, it's good, it's healthy. I think words are really important, actually, and I think that especially with the word cult, I was talking to we've both interviewed Bonnie Zeman, haven't we, recently? Chris?
Yeah.
On your channel and on mine, and I asked her about the use of the word cult, and both she and I are of the same opinion that if it can be identified as a cult, then we absolutely need to make that clear to people. That's describing Jehovah's Witnesses, of course. I mean, I think that word use needs to be precise, it needs to be careful, it needs to be sensitive. You need to think about your audience. You need to think about whether a word such as cult will put people off rather than helping people understand where you're coming from.
Right.
But I think a lot depends basically on who it is you're speaking to and what your agenda is, basically.
I would agree. I think that, you know, as activists, based on who you're talking to, you want to be very, very careful with that word in particular. And if your audience is people who are currently in that prism of belief, you don't. For me, I don't use the word cult because they've already been primed to see that as a trigger word, to trigger defensiveness, to trigger a persecution complex. And as soon as you bring that up, then there's going to be, you know, one of two directions they're going to take it. They're going to either feel persecuted and immediately shut down, or they're going to go into defensiveness mode and say, well, you know, how do you define a cult? Anything can be a cult. You know, every religion is a cult. And so they focus on that term rather than on looking at the actual manipulative things that happen that make, you know, really high demand groups so hurtful. And I found that it's actually easier to talk about those actual techniques when we talk about things like double bind, doctrine over self, toxic professionism, or things like that. Because then they can identify those things, because you're just talking about a technique. You're not specifically talking about their group, and you're not labeling them a cult. And that's more effective for me when I'm doing that. And when you're talking to people who are not in that group and you're warning them about that, then if you use the term cult, people kind of understand what you're talking about.
Perfect. And that's it. And I think we're not necessarily as in disagreement on this, right?
Yeah.
That was actually exactly what I meant. What you guys just said, right? Because it does depend on who you're talking to. The word cult turns off so many people, especially when you're talking to people who are recently out, or people who are still in, who happen to hear what you have to say. It's an immediate turnoff. And so I think that's what I meant when I was saying, if I'm willing to, the importance of, it's a destructive cult, damn it. Like, yes, I mean a very specific thing when I say that. I don't mean some generalized idea, right? I have a very, like the checklist from Janja Lalich, right, on destructive cults. But I'm willing to say high control group, right? Or a coercive group, right? Or, a group that exerts undue influence, something like that.
It just takes so much longer to say than just that one syllable.
I know, right?
There is actually one phenomenon in the XJW movement which really gets on my nerves, and I'm interested to know whether you guys have it in your respective fields.
Yeah.
But there's this thing where some XJWs will make up silly alternatives to Jehovah's Witness lingo. So, for example, they'll say Kingdom Hall, as in dumb stupid, instead of Kingdom Hall. Or they'll say wash towel Babel and whatever society. So, and I that kind of really gets on my nerves, because that's just kind of playground stuff, Right. We have enough kind of legitimate stuff to criticize the organization on without kind of resorting to kind of name calling and that sort of thing. That's just my own gripe,
Yeah, we have the same thing. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I'm curious what you have to say, John. But let me say this: I think it serves. I think that it's what Hubbard referred to. Actually, he forbid it in Scientology, and he wrote an issue called "Jokers and Degraders," where he talked about people who have this joking, degrading attitude, and how it was actually a form of psychosis. And it was absolutely unacceptable, and some people misinterpret that to mean that Scientologists don't ever joke around, right? When of course everybody has a sense of humor and people joke around, but within the world of Scientology, Scientology itself, David Miscavige, L. Ron Hubbard, these are not ever to be used as a target of ridicule or a target of a butt of a joke or something like that. They take that shit very seriously. But I think in the X world, I think it serves, or in the big wide world, I think this kind of humor or ridicule serves two purposes. One of them positive, one of them negative. I think, Lloyd, I think you're exactly right that it can demean the conversation and make something less that can be very serious, make it into something that is not, that makes it so it's not regarded seriously and is not taken, with the weight that it should, especially when we start talking about child abuse, pedophilia, the kind of things that have been being exposed this season with Leah's show, right, on Scientology. But I also think that there's a positive end of that too, which is the chance to laugh at your former group. And I think for ex-members especially, more so than people who were never in, who were just, doing the degrading thing, I think that people who are ex-members who never could laugh, who never could make light of the seriousness of L. Ron Hubbard's words, or how important David Miscavige was, I think that it gives them a chance to blow off some steam. And I think that to that degree, joking and making light can be healthy, You know what I mean?
I'm definitely down with that. I'm definitely down with using humor against cults. For example, there's the Book of Mormon. I just
Yes,
think that comedy is a fantastic tool, because cults hate to be laughed at. So
exactly.
if you've watched my channel, you'll know that I'm forever mocking Watchtower. I just don't appreciate the kind of 5-year-old humor that some people bring to the table. It just makes me
Yes.
cringe and think,
Oh,
oh,
great. Now you're a
yeah.
snob for your own humor, Lloyd. Come
Yeah, I
on.
know. I'm far too highbrow, I'm afraid. What can I
No,
say?
I think you hit on something really important, Chris. And so I was actually a little bit surprised and pleased to hear that, L. Ron Hubbard had this like sensitivity that you shouldn't be mocking and everything, because when you think about it, the people that join that create these organizations are inherently narcissistic. And
Yes.
anyone that studies this stuff knows that like the way you can set off a narcissist more than anything else is to laugh at them, because there's this insecurity that's kind of a thread under there, and so that laughter. And so in Mormonism, like we take an oath in the temple, like raising our hand and at one point pantomiming our own death if we broke these oaths. We took an oath to avoid loud laughter and evil speaking of the Lord's anointed. So like every Mormon that's out there that's in the temple has this seed planted in them that things like loud laughter are bad. And I could just put myself in the framework of like early Nauvoo church history where Joseph Smith is doing these things. And like, if you were to laugh, that would just like diffuse the whole thing. And so I think the aversion to humor draws itself back to kind of those narcissistic origins. But on the other point that you made about the healing power of it, absolutely. I think that if you ever get together with former members of your group, like in an in-person physical setting, this type of humor is going to come up, and it's empowering for yourself because it allows you to reclaim these things that were previously given this special aura and just say, no, they're not special. In fact, I can make light of them and still maintain my own personal integrity. Whereas before, you had to like hide or feel ashamed about that if you were to even allow yourself to do that. So I think there's a very healing aspect of it. And then, as you mentioned with the Book of Mormon, it kind of pointing out the ludicrous nature of some of this stuff. Really, it kind of lets you sit back and we say the emperor does have no clothes, and that's awakening.
I think I speak for all of the hundreds of people who are watching this video at this moment when I ask Jonathan that here on Skype and on YouTube, you should now pantomime your own death. I'm fascinated to see what that looks like.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure all of the hundreds of people watching this will demand the same thing.
There are videos showing similar things. Now, personally, I never had to do it because in 1990, the church sent out a survey. They're like, how come people aren't going to the temple? And they had a bunch of questions. And as a result of that survey, where a lot of people were like, it's kind of creepy, they took out the you used to have to like draw your it's Masonic. So if you ever studied any of the Freemasonry techniques where you swear an oath that your heart will be cut out or that your bowel will be ripped, there's specific hand motions that you used to do. There's an audio recording of the temple penalties is what it's called on my YouTube channel. If you Google thinker of thoughts or thoughts on things and stuff, you can see it. It's very fun.
Wow.
I love the way that the Mormons always find a way of beating the JWs when it comes to sheer bonkers stuff that they do. That hardly anyone's allowed to know about. You guys always beat us on that,
Hey, I'm just
I
gonna
don't
say
know.
right now, I mean, if we're gonna start talking about one-upman shit, I got Xenu. So whatever.
No, that's true, dude. Yeah. I mean, we have like super secret heaven. You have like 33 degrees of super secret heaven.
That's
So
right. That's right. It's awesome. So I thought that the main, I think this is going to be absolutely fascinating. What topics we come up with to talk about. I want to do a whole episode, actually, not this one, but I do want to do a future episode on child abuse and on the kind of things that go on with the kids and with the second gens and stuff. But for this episode, I thought that thematically, I wanted to kind of talk about activism that we've engaged in and what sort of effects we feel we're creating out there with what we do, and the general scene with with our groups and with destructive cults in general, because I do feel personally that each of us are having an effect on the world out there, with the work that we're doing specifically, but I also feel like in the big wide world, with the massive amount of effort that goes on with all ex-members and critics, that there is a definite paradigm shift going on with this topic, or with this subject matter, at least maybe in the United States. I can't say, Europe, Australia, Asia, but that's what it feels like to me from from the years that I've been doing this. What are your thoughts on that? Lloyd, why don't you start with you?
Yeah, as you know, I recently had the chance to come to America and meet people for the first time in the flesh who are from America, and I even went to Canada as well, to Vancouver, and I think when you actually see people face to face for the first time, it's one thing to receive emails or messages. We'll all get that, I'm sure, more than we can cope with. But when you're actually meeting people face to face, and they're telling you what an impact the activism work's had in their lives, it's really quite profound, and it's something that it took me a while to process, actually, after I'd done it. So no, it's definitely having an impact. I mean, I'm the sort of person who always likes to aim high, and I'm never quite satisfied with what I'm doing. I like to take it to the next level, and I think that what's happening at the moment with Scientology, and you touched on Leah Remini's Aftermath series, that's kind of like the gold standard of what we'd like in terms of exposure of cults. I'm sure Jonathan would like the same thing for Mormonism. I'd certainly like the same thing for Jehovah's Witnesses. And so one thing I'm working on at the moment is a Going Clear style documentary that can kind of, again, just take things to the next level. But without a doubt, the kind of work that online activists are doing is making a difference.
Cool.
Yeah, I would agree completely, except I don't want a Leah Remini series. I want there to be a like, I don't know, Westworld, Game of Thrones type miniseries about the life of Joseph Smith and everything, because there is just so much intrigue, and I mean, there's sex, there's violence, there's counterfeiting, there's manipulation. It's great, but
basically, Jonathan wants sex.
I see that. I see that.
Again, this isn't meeting my high standards, frankly, but
Now you're not only a humor snob, but you're lowbrow snob. For me, I think both of you guys have been doing this longer than I have, and I know when I started, I saw both of you guys. I was like, wow, we've got Lloyd and Chris in these separate spaces, but we don't really have anything as comparable that's doing that type of targeted activism about principles. And I thought, Mormonism really needs something like that. And so I spent a lot of time watching both of your shows and seeing how you did it and trying to go more in that direction. I just do this kind of as a side gig. I have a main job and I got all kinds of stuff happening in my family. So it's really just not, I'm not as prolific and perhaps not as well spoken, but I think that I've seen the effect that it's had just in terms of private messages that I get. In terms of the places that I start to see some of the material I've worked on pop up. And I think in particularly as I've gone towards what this is about, and that is doing comparisons between other groups, that tends to be more effective, especially if in a setting I start out not looking at my own group, but looking at Scientology, looking at Jehovah's Witnesses. So I've kind of created a pattern that I've tried to use, which is you articulate a principle that we can all agree is bad. For example, like deception, lying. Then you look at how the Jehovah's Witnesses lie to their congregation, how the Scientologists lie to their congregation. And then you say, well, let's look at some stuff from our own faith. And you don't say that it's lying. You just show, and it's obviously exactly the same thing. And that allows people to say, well, wait a second, I know it's wrong. It's wrong when they do it. Why is it right when we do it?
Right.
And I think I'm moving towards that pattern.
I think that feeds right into the thing I think we're all familiar with of when a person's engaging in exit counseling or cult recovery with people, or trying not cult recovery, but trying to get people exiting from cults. One of the education points is going in on some other groups. I'm not going to talk to you about Scientology, Mr. Scientologist. I'm going to talk to you about how crazy the JWs are. Right. And the Scientologist is like, absolutely, those guys are a cult, man. They are nuts. Can you believe that? They think their temples are going to fly off to heaven? Like, what? That's crazy talk. And then, but you're of course entering in, the ideas that are eventually going to plant seeds that are going to get them going. I think that's where the compare and contrast videos, I think that is one reason why they are effective, because everybody's got interesting beliefs. I'm not going to say everybody's part of a destructive
The Mormons
cult,
are
'cause they're not.
come on. We can say the Mormons are the craziest. Surely.
No, are you kidding me? You guys have the blood issue. I mean, really? You're going to let your kids die?
No,
I mean,
but
at
I'm
least we
talking
allow
about-
our members to go to college so that we can make more money to pay more tithing. That's
I think
why
we need
we're
to step
succeeding.
out. We need to step outside later and sort this out, you and I, Jonathan, frankly.
You're in Croatia.
But I mean, even politically, right? Or
Yeah.
even like socially, there are people who are part of extremist ideas. And I think when they hear some of the stuff that we talk about, I really honestly think, and I don't want to be too weird about this or get too like whatever, projecting or something, but I really do think one of the draws of the work that we do is that people are maybe subconsciously drawn to it because they see aspects of destructive cult behavior in their own lives in non-religious groups even, and learning about this stuff helps them to a degree, or gets them more aware of how extremism touches on so many people's lives in so many different ways. And it takes a while to, in being embroiled in this stuff, to start seeing it more broadly, without at the same time trying to start thinking that, well, everything's a destructive cult, because it's not. I don't mean to go too far off beam with that way of thinking, but
without a doubt, comparing cults is one of the most effective ways. I mean, in my book, in the postscript, I include the story of a young man named Ryan who managed to wake up from JWs, I think as recently as sort of 2014. And one of the things that helped him was watching Going Clear. So it was actually seeing Scientology and the worst of Scientology that really helped him to kind of compare things with his own beliefs. But yeah, it's definitely an area that I'm trying to work on more. I've started the Faith versus Faith episode series, which Jonathan's kindly joined me on for the first one. And I'm really excited because the next one is Islam. And I've got an ex-Muslim coming on the show. So, we were
your digital blurring, anonymizing technology
honestly,
ready.
The guy lives in Jordan, so I'm not entirely sure how he's even able to join me on Skype, quite frankly. But I'm just kind of going along with it. But he's a former Muslim, and Jonathan and I can joke about who's got the craziest cult, but I think we can all agree that Islam is definitely, the king in terms of.
Well, I will certainly say that by qualifying it with radical Islam.
Yeah, obviously,
because I don't want to paint everybody with that brush.
No.
And I know you're not either. I totally know you're not. But I've actually kept my distance a little bit from that because because
you value your life.
Yeah, I mean, you are literally taking your life into your hands when you go after that group. But also, I want to really actually educate myself on it thoroughly before I dive into that world, because there is a lot to know. There's so much contention, so much controversy connected with it, and I really want to have my feet on solid ground when I start talking about that subject. I do plan on getting to it and not just one or two videos. I actually want to move my work in the direction of how do we deal with radicalization and terrorism, because I think that's much more relevant to the big wide world than Scientology, as such. Scientology needs to be dealt with. Scientology is horrible. I'm not, I got all kinds of content lined up for probably another year on Scientology and the stuff I want to put out on it. But as far as life goals, I want to move forward to preventing radicalization in all forms. And I think some of the most extreme that we see in the world these days is radicalized Islamic terrorism. And I want to play a part eventually in somehow working to prevent that kind of thing from going on.
Yeah. It's definitely one of the more pressing issues, confronting society today. It's you could say it's a threat to civilization in a way, because like you say, the forces of radical Islam, they really do want to destroy us, and
Yes.
they're making headway, But no, just going back to what we were saying about contrasting cults.
Yes.
You see exactly the same behavior in radical Islam that you see in Jehovah's Witnesses, that you see with disconnection in Scientology. It's just this craving to control people, and that's really what I'm interested in. I don't really need to know, I feel, all of the ins and outs of what's in the Hadith and what's in the Quran. I just want to know on a human level what it's like to be an ex-Muslim, and what it's like to be literally in fear of your life in many of these countries if you happen to be, for example, an atheist. So we're getting pretty deep now, but that's the end game. That's kind of ultimately the damage that cults are doing, is actually threatening people's lives.
That's right.
What do you guys think about, you mentioned about how an atheist is, and I think there's a tendency for a lot of people who are doing activism online to move from looking at cult control, looking at how you're being manipulated, towards advocating atheism. And I don't do that on my channel. And I'll tell you, part of the reason why is again, I don't want to trigger certain defense mechanisms. But and for me, one of the most important one is Mormonism treats atheism like another religion. There's say, like, people want you to become atheist. They're going to, have you, and they kind of lump all atheists into that one group, and they're very unsophisticated about it. But I would feel like I'm trying to tell somebody to believe a certain way. If I made my point, I'm going to, advocate atheism. Whereas if I teach somebody, I want to teach you critical thought, logic, and reasoning, then I'm giving them the power and the ability to hopefully extract themselves from unethical systems of control and then map their own way using those skills. And they may find a home in atheism, or they may find even a religious group that does not have the intensity of unethical control and still be able to be a part of that community, but maintain their own critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
What is y'all's take on that?
Can I go first, Chris?
Please go for it.
That's a really good question, and actually, I've agonized over that an awful lot. In fact, because obviously, before I set up my John Cedars channel, I obviously set up jwsurvey.org. And very early, I realized that in order to make the website work, we would need a religiously neutral policy. And when I say religiously neutral, we're neither advocating Christianity nor atheism. We're literally just presenting the information and letting people draw their own conclusions. So when I started on my John Cedars channel, I inevitably pursued the same approach. But there were two things. First of all, just by making one video where I said I'm an agnostic, the amount of kind of scorn and vitriol that kind of got poured at me by other XJWs who are religious kind of prompted me to think, hang on, what's going on here? People are going to tell me that I can't even say I'm an agnostic, then I'm damn well going to say it even louder, because that's just the way I am. and the second thing is that, and I've noticed, Jonathan, on your channel, you can't help but look at Mormon propaganda and the videos that are being produced. On my channel, I'm obviously doing rebuttals to JW Broadcasting, and it just so happens that a lot of the material that's being shown is ripe for showing the way that a literal interpretation of the Bible is ridiculous. And I'm not going to censor myself and kind of prevent myself from pointing out certain things that are being said, even though I know that they're not true. They're just not true. Like, for example, in the rebuttal that I'm going to upload today, it's from a convention video where they touch on camels. And I just cannot help but point out, oh, by the way, did you know that camels weren't domesticated until 1000 BCE? And yet Abraham's described as riding around on them at around 2000 BCE,
That's
1,000
weak.
years earlier.
Weak point, Lloyd, because the translators simply substituted the word camel for whatever thing Abraham was riding.
Yeah.
We have this in Mormonism because there were no horses in North America, but it's all in the Book of Mormon. So we just say they were talking about deers or tapirs, and they just substituted the word horse.
Yeah, come on, Lloyd, get with it here.
But my point is that I reached a stage where I thought, no, I'm not going to censor myself, and I'm going to keep JW Survey as a religiously neutral website, because former Jehovah's Witnesses need that kind of landing point where they're not having stuff thrown at them. But even with my channel, I like to take the approach that just because I'm being open about my ideas and my opinions and my atheism, I'm not expecting or demanding that people watching my videos do the same thing. I'm letting people decide for themselves. Just because I'm expressing my opinion on something doesn't mean they have to agree with me. So that's just generally the approach I take, and for the most part, I would say my viewers seem to be okay with it.
Well, I would, that last bit especially is I think my approach to it as well. I am, I have definitely put forward content on my channel, especially my podcast, that is where I've had other atheists on. I interviewed David Silverman, who's about as militant as it gets. And I didn't particularly agree with much of what Silverman was talking about, because I'm all about tolerance, and that means religious tolerance, and tolerance of belief. And I'm very serious about that.
That's a kickback from that episode, didn't you?
Oh, sure. But at the same time, I'm sitting here right now. I'll just show you this. This is what I'm wearing on my shirt right now. Right. So, it's kind of like, okay,
if Jonathan had have only seen that T-shirt before he brought up this subject.
Yeah,
right. I know.
And my T-shirt says, "God made me an atheist. Don't question His wisdom." Right, for audio listeners. But here's my thing on it is I would actually say that I am not an advocate for atheism, which I think would surprise some people, because I have had a lot of atheist-related content on my channel. But my channel is a great reflection of my thought processes as I have left Scientology, and that's always been how I've positioned it. And so when I'm looking at things or interested in things, that's what you see on my channel. And I have come through a process of rejecting Scientology, then rejecting all organized religion pretty much immediately, going into Carl Sagan, James Randi, the skeptical community, right? And looking at that and looking at the world from a rational, skeptical, sort of more pro-science kind of point of view, to now seeing, after a couple years of that and immersing myself in that world, seeing the problems in that world, seeing the examples of extremism in that world, which I know some people are going to just start freaking out when I say the word extremism, but it exists. There are people on the pro-science side of the debate who are dogmatic, who treat science as a kind of religion. I have to say that that's true. However, I'm not saying that about the vast majority of people who advocate for science. I'm just saying that extremism exists, and I've come to learn that extremism exists in any group. And as you educate yourself about how destructive cults work, you start seeing the mentality in just about any group, whether it's political, social, religious, or whatever. And so atheism is kind of a complete rejection of any belief, right? Any supernatural sort of idea of a god or gods. Yet you'll find some atheists who are, spiritual, they have spiritual ideas, or they have, all kinds of ideas, even woo-y kind of pseudoscientific ideas. So it's just kind of this, you just kind of find, I've sort of found that that the spectrums exist in any groups. You start getting people together and you start talking about things, and you start finding all kinds of variety of beliefs and stuff, which is why I've now kind of, I guess, come to a place where, atheism is not the perfect group. The atheists, right, are not the be all end all of existence, And in the end, I guess there isn't really any group that is sort of the be all end all. We're all just sort of trying to make our way. And and that's why I think in the end, where I'm kind of going with this is I'm moving is I'm trying to maintain rather the important thing for me is tolerance of belief, understanding where any individual is coming from, and if they're good, I'm good. If they're good with me, I'm good with them, sort of thing, right? And I think the only sort of thing I think I've been looking at recently with the whole Nazi thing with Charlottesville and all that kind of got me having to think through the idea of, well, where does that tolerance end? Where should we draw lines? And I think that there's a thing about, having an intolerance of intolerance. And I think that's kind of where I'm
Karl
settling.
Popper thing.
Yes, that's right.
A tolerance of intolerance.
Exactly. That there needs to be, you have to draw a line in the practical real world. Ideally,
and drawing lines isn't always easy, but at the same time, it's important that we're able to express our ideas. And my own take on things is that I love the quote from Hitchens, and frankly, it guides most of what I do in life. It's when Hitchens said, the grave will supply plenty of time for silence. Right. In other words, once you're dead, you're not going to be able to say anything else. So you might as well say it now. What's important is that you are being honest with yourself and with the people you're talking to. You're not trying to deceive anyone. So long as those boxes are checked, we can exchange ideas, and we're not going to agree on everything. If we did agree on everything, there's a very good chance we were in a cult, which we don't want to be in. Right. I think it kind of comes full circle to what we were saying to begin with, which is the importance of language. We can really change the inflection of what we're saying and how we're saying it just by the words that we use. And I had an experience on my tour where someone was kind of speaking about atheism, almost kind of standing up and looking around the room and saying, why are we not all atheists, And, my response was to say, well, we're not going to be all atheists. Some people do need religion in their lives. That's right. I don't expect everybody who watches my videos to say, right, well, that's it, I'm going to be an atheist. And I don't demand that they should be an atheist in order to watch my video. All I ask is that I'm allowed an opportunity during my fleeting existence in this universe to bring my ideas to the table on a take it or leave it basis. And as long as that's the case, bring it on.
Well, I think there's something about both of your channels that struck me. To address what you mentioned a second ago, Chris, I mean, your channel is like Critical Thinker at Large. And I think that the content that you put out is focused on this notion of critical thinking. And so no matter what group you find yourself in, whether you're in an atheist club or anything like that, you're still applying those critical thinking things. And if you guys are like me, as soon as some of the same group think, as soon as the same shunning, as soon as any of those things start popping up, no matter where you are, like the contours of that stand out so much because we got out of it in our own group. And so once you learn how to identify and reject and move beyond those manipulative techniques, it's very helpful no matter what group that you're in. And for me, my introduction to this was the work of Robert J. Lifton. And he wasn't even dealing with a religion. He was dealing with people that had been brainwashed by the communist revolution in China. And then seeing some of the other work that was done in political groups in America, even I think there's like a karate club that they identified that use these things. You can start to see how this is a skill set that once you get can be applicable no matter where you are. And Lloyd, to your point about how you want to be able to express what you do, even though like when I watch your videos and I'm thinking, okay, how would a Mormon perceive these things? Even when you bring up, contradictions in the Bible and things like that, you do it in a way that's appealing to people's logic and reason that allows them to say, well, that is a contradiction. But, they can still decide for themselves to what level they want to subscribe to a spiritual belief or anything beyond that. Because I think looking at the Bible and realizing that it is not an unquestionable standard of morality is healthy for anyone, for any text. And so being able to parse out things that are wrong that you should reject from things that do have inherent beauty. You know, there is beauty in the Bible in the terms of the language and the literature. You know, we appreciate certain morality tales that we recognize in our world. I think Les Miserables, or however you pronounce it, is a beautiful story of redemption. And I find a great deal of meaning in that.
Beautiful culture on this video already. We're getting our French pronunciation.
It's easier to say Les Mis, all right? All right. You can edit that. Please edit that part out. At any rate.
Absolutely not. Don't do it, Chris.
It's staying in. It's totally staying in.
Do not slow it down. All right. Anyway, so, but I find the works of Victor Hugo to be, you know, very inspiring. But in the same way, you can look at things like the Book of Job and in the Bible and everything, and it was originally told as a morality tale with no less validity in terms of can we learn morals from this lesson. And some morality tales, frankly, when we reflect on them, we learn things not to do, principles not to accept. And so there's value in the Bible in that, as long as you have that critical thinking thing and the ability to identify morality independent of, you know, these old texts from ancient lore or whatever.
I did a video recently just on while we're on the Bible, where I was talking about the story of the Good Samaritan and how it was pointed to by Jehovah's Witness leadership as an example of discriminating on people or giving less to people. Giving charitably to people only if they're in your religion and only if it's spiritual help that you're rendering, which is the exact opposite message of the story of the Good Samaritan, which is all about giving to people regardless of what their beliefs are, because the priest goes past on the road, the Levite goes past on the road, both of whom are in that person's religion, and it ends up being the heretic who stops and renders aid. And I actually said in my video that that's probably my favorite verse in the whole Bible because of its uncharacteristically humanist message. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful story. But we're all adults and we can decide if something is quite clearly wrong in the Bible, we can say it. We shouldn't feel afraid to say it.
Well, absolutely. I don't have any holiness connected with that book at all.
Chris, tell us your most inspirational Xenu story.
Yeah, come on. We want Chris. The Xenu. We want the Thetans.
You know he's a good guy. He's hanging out.
Oh yeah.
Tell the volcano one.
Mountain fortress wherever he is. Yeah.
Tell the volcano one again.
Oh God.
Life lessons from the volcano.
Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. Good. Moving right along. I wish that. Well, two things. I think I really, really wish if I could, have my three wishes sort of thing. I might actually seriously contemplate putting this one down there. That. The confirmation bias that goes on with that book is just amazing. You can use that book to justify anything. And again, that's that extremist, mindset I rail against. I really wish that, like the translations and stuff, like all the errors in translations, all the nonsense that has gone on with that book over the last 2,000 years, and people's inability to see that nonsense. That's the thing about organized religion that drives me more batty, I think, than anything else, is the literalness with which certain things are looked at, and the extremism that is justified by, stuff that was written down, in some, story, thousands of years ago. And I just go, okay, because some, nomad wrote down on a script that we're supposed to not engage in whatever practice they, I don't even know what the
mixed fabrics.
Yeah, whatever or eating, fish or whatever, shellfish, now gays are unacceptable, and you just go, wait a minute, what? How did this happen? Where did this all come from? Which is why I think the thing that I've stuck with the whole time and why I'm never going to rebrand my channel is the critical thinking. I think I lucked into finding that. I literally remember the moment it happened, doing Google searches on stuff about Scientology and hitting on Carl Sagan. It's a pivotal point in my life, and I want to share that, with others, which is why I think I'm never going to change that branding on my channel, because that's the thing that keeps me sane, keeps me going. And
you heard it here first, folks.
If he ever changes it, you can totally ignore anything else he ever says
That's
because he
right.
betrayed himself.
That's right. But I think that's the tool. I think that's if you're going to look at it that way. The specifics of belief, they change. They should. The specifics of some issue, they change, and they should. But if we can maintain, a critical, skeptical, what are the facts? How do we, relate to those facts? And really, in the end, critical thinking, not for critical thinking's sake, but for the sake of how do we all get along better? That's the slant I have on it, and I think I don't think that's going to change either.
I may be a little bit more jaded when it comes to getting along with people because like one really difficult lesson I had to learn when getting out of the cult is that you do get to choose who your friends are, and that if you can't automatically make friends out of everyone who's had your same life experience. So for example, some XJWs immediately leap to making friends from other XJWs, just assuming they're going to be perfect friend material because they've had the same shared experience. It just doesn't work that way, because if you're an unpleasant person as a JW, you'll be an unpleasant person as an ex-JW, generally speaking.
That's right.
So I just in my, not just with that, but just in my everyday life experiences, I think there are some people who you just can't get on with. And I do believe, maybe I'm jaded, but that just with my own personal interactions, I don't mind saying that, for example, here in Croatia, my family's being sued by an old lady. I'm going to call her an old lady. That's the kindest thing I can say. Who has the most tenuous claim on their land that you could possibly imagine. But the hoops that she's jumped through to try and increase her claim and try and increase her claim on our house, purely because she knows I'm English and thinks that this is a good way of her getting money. It's just astonishing. And the amount of stress that's caused, I just can't imagine doing that if I were in her shoes. I think that some people genuinely are selfish, genuinely are greedy, and genuinely are narcissistic. And so from that point of view, I'm not really interested in everyone just getting along, because I know that it's an impossible ask,
Lloyd Evans, cynical thinker at the
Yeah.
Well, let me, just because this is actually highly relevant to what you just mentioned, I should say in the last 48 hours, I've had a little bit of a wake-up call myself on that in regards to racism. The Charlottesville thing kind of opened up a whole can of ugly in regards to Trump supporters. And it's not like there weren't people who weren't talking about this or spotting this a year ago. But I wasn't one of those people necessarily, or I had more hope or faith in my fellow man than maybe was warranted by the facts. And I have had a bit of a, I had a back and forth with a Trump supporter recently on Facebook. I've had numerous back and forths, private messages and stuff over the last year, over the last 6 months especially, with Trump supporters, trying to understand, trying to build bridges, trying to mend fences, trying to work on how do we, bridge these divides. And the wake-up call that I had with Charlottesville, with Nazis, with racism, with Trump supporters, is that some of this, short of a full-blown intervention in person with the person, you're not going to get them to change their mind about something that is so plain, so obvious, so blatant. I mean, Trump's racism is it is unquestionable that the man is a cad. He's a complete boob, and he has said some extremely racist things. But here is the Trump supporter. Nope, I don't see any racism there. I don't, Trump's ragging on Mexicans, and it's like, no, that's not racism, because Mexican's not a race. That's, it's a nation. And you just go, there's no talking to you. There's just none. This is impossible. And and of course it bleeds into, the groups that we were part of and the sort of thinking that we were part of. And I've, tried to do my part to point out that there is a cult of Trump. Not every Trump supporter is part of that cult, but it
Yeah,
exists, you
yeah.
know,
I am
and
so offended by what you were talking about. Trump is my guy. How dare you? I'm from Texas.
But this, in all seriousness, this goes back to exactly what I was saying earlier, that the grave will supply plenty of time for silence, that the time to speak out against bigotry and racism and people being oppressed and Nazis trying to have a resurgence is now. Once we're dead, it's too late. Once the Trump supporters have had their way and minorities are silenced and white supremacy rules, then it's too late. The time to speak out against oppressed minorities is when the threat is there, and when these people are in the insurgency. So I'm afraid I'm unapologetic when it comes to, I'm not afraid to make enemies, shall we say. If it's just simply a case of me expressing my views, people can take them or leave them. I'm not going to demand that they accept what I think. But like, for example, I'm sure we'll have had a few people stop viewing just now. We've started talking about Trump, but frankly, good riddance, because these are really serious issues, and it's all right when you're not personally affected. But if you are, a member of a black community where you are being genuinely discriminated against, and where life is a struggle, and then you're, seeing Confederate monuments and this kind of, like you say, religious zealotry with which they're being protected. No, this is the time to speak out against that kind of thing, I think.
I think you're articulating something that has been a big part of my awakening, and that's moral clarity. Like in the group, moral clarity is so difficult because anytime you're faced with an issue, you always have to filter it. In Mormonism, we filter it through the brethren. Well, what does the prophet think about this? So, the Iraq War. Well, do I support it? Am I against it? What do the brethren think about it? And so your morality always has to go through that filter. And once you separate yourself from that system, you start to develop a moral standard internally based on what you've learned in your journey. And then when you're confronted with things like racism, then you can have a moral clarity that allows you to speak boldly on your principles without having to always insert the deferential language that characterizes the in-group think. And that's abrasive to some people who don't have that degree of moral clarity yet through, lack of information or knowledge. That's my kind of point on that.
Well, and this is good because it brings me to, I think, what will probably be our final point here, just given the time consideration here. I wanted to say that it is not, to speak to what Lloyd was just talking about, speaking out is not just, in case anybody has some thing about this. Well, I don't care about the blacks, or I don't care about this, I don't care about that. I don't care about, trans people, LGBT, ABC, whatever, right? I want to point out, if to any of those people who are still listening, that
there's three of them probably.
Yeah, exactly. That it is self-preservation, because if you think that in a world that is dominated by cult thinking that you're safe, you are so mistaken. To think that the Nazis never turned on themselves, for example, right? That you start questioning what goes on in these groups, right? And they will turn on you so quickly. It is shocking. It's a rude awakening almost every single time, and it never should be, because it's the most obvious thing about these groups is that when you go extremist, anybody who's not 1000% with you needs to, get the axe, right? And that happens internally. You don't have to be a subjugated minority to realize that these groups are dangerous to everyone, including their own membership. And these people really should realize it. But kind of like dictators in history, they're just the stupidest idiots, because they always feel like they're the exception. They're the ones who aren't going to suffer the consequences for that every other person in history has suffered as a result of being part of the extremism. So here's my final talking point for this. What do you guys think about this idea? I think that having been part of an extremist group or a destructive cult, that puts us in a position of being more easily able to see and recognize this kind of thinking and this kind of dangerous nonsense in the society at large. What do you guys think?
I'll let you go, Lloyd.
I hate interrupting people. Yeah, I agree. We've been in what can be described as a totalitarian system where only one man or only one group of people gets to decide what's right and wrong and how people should live their lives. And so it's easier for us to identify when society in general is heading in that direction. And I think we can all agree it is. Whether it's irreversible or not, I certainly hope it isn't. I like to think of it as a hiccup. But again, these issues aren't going to be solved unless people speak up. And it behooves people who have been in totalitarian systems to bring their knowledge to the table and say, look, this is the end game and this is what I've experienced. And more people will experience this unless we speak out. I just wanted to kind of add, because I'm aware that what we've just been saying about Trump will have upset a lot of people. But we were also talking about religion earlier, and if there is one religion that I have, or one religious text that I hold to in my life, it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that all countries signed up to in 1945, and I say that unapologetically. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you have someone come along who starts undermining human rights and starts undermining people's right to equality, people's right to be treated the same, people's right to get married whether they're gay or lesbian, people's right to employment and to be treated the same under law, that's when you need to speak out. And regardless of what our personal politics are, we've all got different politics. I get the impression that we've all got slightly different shades of belief or of unbelief. But I'm pretty sure that all three of us can agree on human rights and how important they are. And once you establish that framework and you establish that as the basis, there can be no apology for speaking out for them.
Big time. Jonathan?
I don't know that I have too much to add to that. In terms of the question of, does our experience give us, maybe a platform that allows us to call out and recognize these things? I have to agree with that. Just even in your personal day-to-day interactions, people that have not had to confront this in their lives, I find maybe don't recognize it as much. They don't see the manipulation. It's kind of like when you think about different levels of virulence in a disease. You can have a disease that if you catch it, you're dead within 24 hours. Okay. And that disease, maybe it's really disgusting. It's very obvious, but it's not going to spread that far because all of its carriers die immediately. Whereas if you have a disease that doesn't really affect you all that much, but can spread, and then maybe you have bad consequences in a month to a year or beyond that, then that's going to spread very, very far. And so I feel like, taking that metaphor, Jim Jones and some of these other things, those are diseases that kind of burnt out really quick. I look at Mormonism, and it is one of these very, very subtle, very sophisticated things that the contours of the control don't stand out, and so it spreads. And so just getting people, and then you even look at, there are other faiths, other religions that still articulate and come around a belief in God, and yet they've come to a more ethical way of dealing with doubt and dealing with dissent. And so, my family still participates in a local congregation. It happens to be Lutheran. We don't participate in the liturgical services, but they have a youth ministry that's basically just community theater. And they don't inject it with any religious themes. It's just basically we want to help people develop their talents. And there's no atheist community that's doing anything like this. Yeah. There's no anything. But as I have come to ask them, what do you do with the millennials who are growing up in an atheist age? And, they said, well, we've had kids that stand up, at the end of their catechism or whatever it is and say, I don't know if any of this is real. I don't really know if God is real, but, you guys are my family and I enjoy being here. And so looking at the way that the group handles dissent and the way that they do it is complete acceptance.
Yeah.
And so I can understand how someone can be a part of a religious community and still find it healthy, but our work in helping people to identify unhealthy things so that when they see it, they can work against it. And religion is not going away. And many of us have traditions and family traditions that are still rooted in those religions. So for me in Mormonism, I know Mormonism's not going away, but what I want to do is call out these unhealthy things by waking people up to them and by starting a movement to get change so that we can start to eliminate the toxic elements and move our society along, respecting some of the healthy aspects of our traditions. And so that's my input on that.
Viewers probably won't be aware of this, but before this show, Jonathan agreed to show us his secret underwear. So
no,
that's a rousing finale to the show.
Not gonna happen.
Not gonna
It's
happen.
now Speedos and a tongue.
Magic Speedos. All right, guys. Well, look, I really appreciate your time and coming together on this. And like I said, I think we're gonna do more of these. I'm sure people are gonna want that. I certainly hope so, because I think we all bring some interesting perspectives to this conversation and to this topic or subject matter. And so for now, I'm going to wrap up because we've been at this for about an hour, and that's been a good amount of time. So. Jonathan and Lloyd, thank you very much for coming around. And let me just do my usual end of show shtick here, which is, hey guys, any comments, feedback, good, bad, or sideways, go ahead and leave it in the comments section on YouTube or at the, that's right down there, or at the sensiblyspeaking.com website. I will see I think I see everything that comes along there, and I definitely appreciate your feedback. So again, thanks guys for being on board, and we will see you all next week. Bye-bye.